The companies that employed your parents built their reputations over decades inside economies they understood, with workforces they were accountable to, and regulators who shared a language with their boardrooms. That world ended quietly and without announcement somewhere between 2000 and 2025. It ended not through collapse or crisis, but through a series of transactions that were approved by regulators, welcomed by governments seeking investment, and reported in the financial press as straightforward business news. What those transactions added up to, taken together across 2 decades, is a structural transfer of corporate ownership and decision-making authority on a scale that has no precedent in peacetime economic history. The companies doing the acquiring were not American. They were not European. They were Indian. The numbers are significant enough to require stating plainly before analysis. Indian-born CEOs now run companies with a combined market capitalization exceeding $8 trillion. That figure encompasses Google, Microsoft, Chanel, PepsiCo, IBM, MasterCard, and dozens of other organizations that most people in Western countries would identify as domestic institutions. Tata Group, a conglomerate founded in Bombay in 1868, is the largest private sector employer in the United Kingdom. It owns Jaguar Land Rover, Tetley Tea, Corus Steel, and dozens of other brands that British consumers regard as part of their industrial identity. ArcelorMittal, controlled by the Mittal family and headquartered in Luxembourg, is the world's second-largest steel producer and owns facilities across 14 countries. Infosys and Wipro together employ hundreds of thousands of technology workers globally and manage the IT infrastructure of governments, banks, and hospitals across the Western world. None of this happened secretly. Every acquisition was publicly reported. Every regulatory approval was a matter of public record. What did not happen, what has still not happened in any meaningful public forum, is an honest conversation about what the aggregate of these individually approved transactions means for the people whose working lives, savings, and community infrastructure are now subject to decisions made in boardrooms that answer to a different set of institutional, cultural, and political priorities than the ones their employees. The governance question begins with the specific mechanism of acquisition promises. When Tata Motors acquired Jaguar Land Rover from Ford in 2008, the transaction was presented to British workers, trade unions, and the Competition Commission as a rescue of 2 iconic British manufacturing brands by a credible, long-term industrial owner. The messaging around workforce protection was explicit. The legal enforceability of those commitments was not. British regulatory frameworks for approving foreign acquisitions focus primarily on competition law, market concentration, and pricing power. They do not require binding enforceable commitments on employment levels, domestic investment, or supply chain sourcing. The promises made during the approval process exist to facilitate regulatory consent. Their legal status after completion is effectively nil. Within 18 months of the Tata Motors acquisition completing, restructuring at Jaguar Land Rover began. The Economic Policy Institute, examining a broader data set of major foreign acquisitions of manufacturing companies, found that employment at acquired companies fell an average of 11% in the 3 years following completion, compared with comparable non-acquired companies. The workers whose livelihoods depend on post-acquisition decisions have no formal representation in the process through which those acquisitions are approved. They are the constituency most directly affected by the outcome, and the one with the least formal standing in the process that determines it. The technology sector tells a different version of the same story. The concentration of Indian-born leadership at the top of American and European technology companies is not the product of a coordinated strategy. It is the product of decades of extraordinary educational investment in India, of the specific pathways through IIT and IIM that produced a generation of engineers and managers who excelled within Western corporate structures and rose through them on merit. The phenomenon is genuine, and the individuals involved have earned their positions. What the phenomenon also represents at scale is a shift in the cultural, institutional, and ultimately political orientation of the organizations these individuals lead. A company whose CEO was educated in Chennai and whose CFO was educated in Hyderabad makes decisions about supply chains, hiring, investment, and public policy engagement that reflect a different set of assumptions and relationships than the same decisions made by executives whose entire formation was within the Western systems those companies serve. The question is not whether Indian ownership and leadership of Western companies is good or bad. It is whether the scale of this shift, its aggregate significance for employment, supply chains, infrastructure, and institutional decision-making, has been explained accurately to the populations most affected by it. The transactions that produced it were individually approved. The aggregate was never voted on, never fully debated, and never explained to the workers who are living its consequences. That gap between what was transacted and what was understood is the story that this channel covers, and it is far from over. If this changed how you see the companies you thought were still local, follow now. This channel covers the hidden shifts behind the global economy. Who owns the companies you rely on? Who profits from the decisions being made? And how power quietly moves without most people ever noticing it happening. The transactions were public. The consequences were not. Follow for more stories about the systems shaping your life from behind the scenes.